Artificial intelligence is the buzzword of the day. From Midjourney to ChatGPT, if you're sufficiently online, most likely you've probably tried out or interacted with one or many of these programs. Even our trusty digital assistants like Siri or Alexa are a form of AI. It may seem right now like most artificial intelligence programs are basically gimmicky or serve a narrow, specific purpose. But the technology is improving all the time. So the question is, what happens when AI is able to outperform humans? Well, it's a good thing my cousin Nick has a job answering that very question. I brought him on today for an interview. Stay tuned, and I hope you enjoy. Hello, Nick. Welcome, and thank you very much for doing this interview. You are an AI safety specialist. Could you please talk in brief about what that job entails and how you came to be in this path?
Yes. So I work in AI operations, and so I generally help out with all kinds of AI problems at my company. And the most recent is AI safety, right? It's the hot topic. We want to make sure that we're doing things responsibly.
Okay.
And that's kind of a hard thing to determine, right? So to get to this path, I had studied computers in college, studied information systems, so just how information is transmitted over systems and how it's recorded and how to do that safely and how it's processed, which then led to AI. And then I've worked at a few different companies, software companies doing QA, doing help desk work. I've even actually worked on the mergers and acquisitions teams for a venture capital firm. And that was very fun because I was managing the help desk and working on that as well. And what's interesting about that work is that you see a lot of things from a lot of different angles, and you start to interview people in their native role about like what are the core aspects of your role, and it starts to give you that system level thinking, the kind of things that they teach you when you study engineering, the kinds of things they teach you when you study data science.
You understand how the pieces of these complex machines and systems really fit together.
And then when AI became a really big factor in our company, and it became my new role to make sure that we rolled it out smoothly and gradually. The education, the adoption, the implementation has all been a part of what I've been doing. And it started with third-party softwares, and now I'm helping to police and help to create the guardrails for our new internal products.
Okay, cool. So let's start off with some examples of like what exactly is this AI that is being rolled out on the organizational level? Is it like a large language model, or is it some other kind of thing? What is it supposed to do that adds value to, I guess, the company that is adopting it?
Yeah, so AI is very interesting to me because it's a lot of things. It's generally categorized as machine learning, right? We're looking at things that are as a really good book is titled, but also calls them, they're prediction machines. They look at statistical analysis of the highest likely output that would meet your criteria. So this is where you can get large language models from, right? They don't actually speak English. They don't truly understand it, unless you kind of subscribe to the Chinese room thought experiment. And so then what you're looking at is something that knows that after this word, statistically, it's probably this and this and this and this and this, and then that's a complete answer.
So it sort of reverse engineers sentences and ideas, not in the same way that we would think about them, but in terms of statistical probability.
Right. And because what it's looking at is every word that you say has a relation to every other word that you say. And so it's looking on a scale of plus or minus whatever the scaling is to say that how related is this to other words? The city to the word, let's say, Paris, highly. But then to the nation of France, yes, because there are cities in it, right? And so it starts to weigh that out and say that, okay, well, statistically speaking, they're probably not going to think that it's this. And when they're talking about cities, they're probably not talking about cats, dogs, and et cetera, unless there happens to be city names that involve those.
Mhm.
And that's how it works. And every single word in the language that it's trained on, it has these parameters and it weighs the information it knows about that individual word or token and its relation to every other token it's ever been trained on.
Right.
And so the ones that you're seeing in companies are typically machine learning models that help to do like predictions and analysis, cultivation of data for dashboarding and scheduling and all kinds of other things. So that you can start to have that like predictive look. And it's typically just data on screen cultivated from large data sources that we call data lakes and then put in there. They can also come from organized tables as well. But it seems kind of like that's kind of like gilding the lily, right? If you already have cultivated, organized data, why would you put AI to the task for that anyway?
Right.
And then the other version of it is actual language models. And language models are what you typically would think of as AI because that's the prettiest version, the most hyped version
It's the
of
one you
other
can
than
talk to and get the fun words back. Yeah.
exactly. I think the only thing that's cooler than a language model are these image generation video ones. Sora and other ones are
Oh
really
yeah.
blowing my mind these days because they're getting to be quite good.
I quite like the music generation Suno AI. You can just plug in a few keywords and you get like this fully structured, it fully understands music theory
Yeah.
and the vocals are in pitch and all sorts of different genres. That's very fascinating too.
I think it's interesting how
Mhm.
people are using those kinds of things because the more they use them and the more they expose these models to uh, interesting kinds of ways of thinking because of the audience is the
Sure.
essentially the training data, it will
Mhm.
get better and better as it goes. And that's the nature of it for models that are not frozen.
Well, so on the face of it, that all sounds very benign. So then the question is, where does the safety component come in? What exactly is it that you have to do to create guardrails? What do those look like?
So for AI safety, one of the things that comes up a lot is like, oh, this is just a music generation piece of software, or
Mhm.
this is just making a dashboard so it's easier for me to read. But
Mhm.
previously, those things were skills that people were trained in to do,
Sure.
typically entry level positions, right?
Mhm.
So, hey, I need a jingle. Well, a lot of songwriters and people, if you watch the Johnny Cash movie, granted, it's a dramatization, but it talks about that it started off as like hymns and other things, and then
Mhm.
jingles, and all of a sudden he had ideas for proper music. And this is kind of the normal way things go, right? Like I started off with a help desk, started then doing QA for software,
Right.
and then work your way up, start doing some business, and then all of a sudden I'm able to work on AI in larger, more complex things. If AI takes all of these entry level jobs, or takes these skills away, how do you know when you have someone that is ready to take on more advanced work? Do
Right.
you even bother hiring those people? Or even worse, let's say everything stays status quo and you have lots of entry level people just using entry level software to make more of the same thing. How do you know that's not noise and if it's good or not? Because if
Mhm.
all the skills are outsourced to the software, eventually how do we know if it's good and if we can call it on BS or for bias or other things?
Sure.
This
You
is where
basically
danger.
need someone to check its work, essentially.
Always,
Yeah.
always the human in the loop is the
Mhm.
preferred system.
And do you think that that's going to be the way that things stay, or are we sort of at like a temporary point of equilibrium and things will change into the future?
I I think we're kind of at a temporary equilibrium. I think more and more of our power will be given to AI.
Mm,
Um, and I think that's going to be a little bit of a problem. So there's a really good book called Power and Prediction. Would recommend reading it. And it talks about the transition of power as technologies are made, whether it is to other people or from away from people that used to do that work to the
mm,
technology, which then means the power, like figurative power, coalesces to people that control those machines.
mhm.
And what ends up happening is that if we move to this new systems, right now we're at general models where people are just using general models that are trained by companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, et cetera, right?
Right.
And they have no specificity to the work that you're doing. You can
Mm,
help it understand, but then next came in a series of assistants. And then the assistants API from OpenAI came out, gems from Gemini started coming out. And this allowed you to create like modes of thinking, giving it a role to pretend that it's specifically doing a certain thing. And then you could custom tune them to give
right.
them extra training data.
Training data. Mhm.
Yeah. And so then you could start to give it custom weights to say that I know your general model says this, but because you're going to be playing the role of, let's say, stockbroker,
Focus
uh,
on this.
yeah, look at that high liquidity is probably not super good in a company that's working in this kind of a field, that kind of information that's very specific to a field.
Sure.
And then you can give it, on top of that, a database to go through, which is considered retrieval augmented generation, RAG. And so then on top of that tuning to change its weights and its values and its knowledge base that's intrinsic to the model, you can also then give it a knowledge base to comb through, and it would read through it like a human would and cite its sources as it works. That's still pretty benign, other than the fact that that's doing the work of a lot of people that would typically do research.
True.
The next step to this is agents. Agents have the ability to work autonomously. They work towards a goal, and given as many parameters that they are allowed to control themselves, they are able to do this work. So let's say you have a AI bot that is controlling the water, the sunlight, and the nutrient mixture on a series of plants that are working on an indoor hydroponic system.
Mm-hmm.
If you gave it the directive, keep these plants alive, and a basic amount of information to go through in its RAG database or even in custom tuning, eventually it would figure out how to keep these things alive. And as the world shifted, it would learn what it needed to do. And based on how complex the model is, it could continuously adjust to keep the plants alive. It's not following very specific instructions. It's not saying it's 60 degrees outside, make sure you go through all of your paperwork to find out what that means and all the optimum conditions. You just said keep plants alive, and then you allowed it to control all of these dials. That becomes you removing the power, because our current system is based upon these factors, based upon these readings. What do you think I should do? And then the human has to go turn those dials.
So you're basically just consulting the AI rather than making it do the task. Gotcha.
Right now, but eventually we get to this point where agents are coming. They're already out. Microsoft already has them. OpenAI is allowing research agents and others to do things for you. And with a certain amount of control, they're giving up that human in the loop step.
Yes.
And more of that will result in tangible work being done, as well as automation, which eventually will reduce the amount of man hours needed for those redundant tasks.
Yeah, that sort of raises a bit of an existential question for me, and it probably should for many other people, because I am, going into a graduate school program, and that requires investing money into the hopes that it will provide me with a job in the future. And I don't really exactly know what that future is going to look like, even in the next few years, where, for instance, I want to go into space policy. I think that's super cool, and that's just my calling, and that's what I want to do. But maybe it turns out that, in a year and a half's time, someone invents like an agent robot that is super duper good at writing space policy, better than maybe the average human could hope to be, unless they were someone who had decades of experience. And in that case, what am I supposed to do? Because I've just spent all this time, investing in this future job that might disappear. So I guess my question is, what's sort of the rational strategy for dealing with this changing world?
So my view, and what I've seen kind of repeated from other people that are in this field, is that education and ability in a certain kind of expertise can't really be replaced by AI. AI is typically very good at being generalists and things like that. Now, granted, superintelligence and other things like that, and that's a future state, right?
Yeah, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, and it's, whether you believe in those things or not, that is a different state of things. But for now, one of the things that I thought was really interesting, there was a study that was done, and the summarization of it all is that AI helps entry-level employees or generalists become much better.
Yes.
They see that it can produce up to 60% improvement in the quality of their work. But people with high levels of education that are very specific, like being a lawyer
Mm,
or in making those kinds of cases, calls in a case and the argument for those things. A person who's really good at sales for a company because they know that product in and out, and they
right.
know that the difference between literally a shade of blue here and there could genuinely affect psychology. That taste made stuff that is very specific, that's hardened over years of ability, that those people receive less than an 8% improvement in their productivity.
That
And
makes
sometimes
sense.
it's a detriment.
Like it's a distraction. It's just noise.
Right.
Mm,
So you'll find that AI is never going to replace high levels of education and high levels of specificity.
mm.
It will replace generalist and busy work.
Yes.
Imagine in that same field for policy, right? That instead of clicking through every website that is involved in space policy, every distributor of parts, every maker of the actual planes, all of those things, right? And then every governmental site that touches it, you could actually have an AI do a scouring and bring you a TLDR with citations every day.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
then you get to read them and decide what they mean for your field. And sure, maybe at that point, the AI would be conversational and you could work with it to help it understand. But that's busy work for somebody who's high dollar, high value, and high training. That's a waste of time. That's
No,
an
for sure.
intern's job. That's an entry level job.
Right.
So then you could spend more time doing the things of why you got into this field in the first place.
Mhm. Well, that sounds great. It's just a matter of like, let's say there's a graded pay scale. And in order to get to that position where you're using these tools, you have to actually demonstrate, that you have what it takes. And that requires getting promoted from the entry level position. Maybe the only way to get into a certain industry is to be the intern who does all the busy work and compiles those reports. That position goes away. Are they suddenly going to trust newbies, new hires to do these things where they're interfacing with AI and making complex decisions? I'm not so sure.
I don't think so either. I think one of the things that's going to change a lot is how we approach vetting and getting humans into the loop of these
Hmm.
things. Because right now, the thing that I tell people at work quite often is that you are not going to be replaced by AI. AI is not in that technology, is not in that area, and it's not going to be there for quite a while. But you will be at risk of losing your job to somebody who can do your job with AI to a higher level of precision, to a higher volume.
Right.
So if you're in that spot right now, right, I wouldn't know what to tell a middle schooler or a high schooler who's looking at
Yeah.
the doomsday clock. But if you're in the spot that you're in right now, my recommendation is to pursue your dreams, pursue it hard, and realize that it is going to change. So while you're doing this, unfortunately, you're going back to night school and cultivating a set of skills that weren't taught to you in college because
Hmm.
your job will be done with AI in the future.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to understand how that'll be done.
Hmm. And I think really anyone who's paying attention to this stuff at all is getting a leg up compared to probably the average person. Because my impression has been that the average person doesn't really know what's going on with AI at all. I think when they think of AI, they picture the Will Smith eating spaghetti video from like a few years ago, and they're like, oh, it's this crappy thing. It's like just a novelty. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly worth learning about.
I'm on quite a few Reddits, and there's this big divide of like we're so cooked, and look at this ridiculous video, it'll never replace me, right?
Yeah,
And it's kind of interesting to see that the world has not yet really adopted AI to the extent that you think it would. For people that are in
right.
the space, right, that are passionate about technology, or maybe a little bit doom scrolling, right, trying to get into their niche of the world.
Hmm.
Uh, it seems like AI is just the most prolific technology and every person's into it. But studies that have been released about adoption from 2022 to 23 to 24 and then now 25. So, right, 23 and 24, the numbers have only bumped based on who's doing the measurement
Mm,
between 1 to 3% in 2023 to maybe 5 to 8% in 2024.
interesting.
So, the percentage of people that are using AI regularly to do their job is not that much. And if we really did have a tremendous amount of people using AI all the time for every job, OpenAI wouldn't be hemorrhaging money.
Yeah.
They're spending like $3,000 per like super level request, and they can only get
Hmm.
people to pay $200 for their subscription. And I pay $20. I won't pay that much. And so they need the plethora model, right? And they need even kind of the gym model where a few people forget they have it and they pay and they don't use it.
Oh yeah.
Because if not, they're never going to be profitable.
Well, it could be possible then that maybe there's a breakaway moment where some company or several companies within a variety of industries just emerge onto the scene and start doing so well because they have, improved or streamlined their process, and then all their competitors kind of have to wake up about it. I mean, a similar thing had happened around the time that the internet first came around and people were doing, online shopping and that sort of thing. So yeah, well. Yeah, I guess it's maybe worthwhile now to start to think about some of the more speculative aspects of this. I have a sort of infographic thing that I've put together, which I kind of want to talk about. And yeah, let me share my screen real quick.
Queuing up. There it is. All right. Old man
Okay.
style. I got to put on my glasses.
Yes. Well, I can also zoom in if you need me to. I probably should zoom in, and you can see
Okay, I
this little
see.
cursor here.
Hmm.
Okay, so this is sort of what kind of sent me into a bit of a tizzy about all this because a few weeks back, there was, of course, this AI that a Chinese company made called Deepseek that sort of came out of the ether and, made a lot of people kind of freak out because there's sort of this mental model in a lot of people's heads about where AI was at. And then all of a sudden we found this, technology that just kind of came out of the blue and, outstrips people's expectations of the technological capacity, or at least it seems to, we don't exactly know what it is or isn't capable of. And it's suggesting to people that maybe we're starting to see the beginning of a runaway effect, where sooner than people anticipated, we have something called AGI, which you probably know about, artificial general intelligence, which is just basically an agentic model that is able to do all sorts of general applications. So it's capable of operating on the level of a high level human being in pretty much any task you set in front of it. Maybe you need to feed it some extra data, but that's about right. So you can see a lot of automation from that. And then with AGI, it breaks through into something called ASI, artificial superintelligence, which is basically it's just able to learn and iterate so much that it just totally leaves even the smartest human being in the dust completely. So I have this sort of model, this infographic that I've put together, kind of representing the four positions that I think people are at right now
I can see
in
that.
this
Yeah, I
debate.
like this.
And I'm actually curious to see where you're at thinking about this positionally. So we have a vertical axis that is representing the goodness of ASI, and I guess the horizontal axis is kind of representing the immediate feasibility of it. All the way on the far left side, we have people who basically are like, "This is, not something we should be worrying about at all. Like it's way out in the future." And then for the very far opposite side of that spectrum, we have people who are like, "This is coming. We need to get really prepared and like buckle down. It's going to happen." Um, yeah, so I would say that up until maybe a few months ago, I was somewhere on the left side of this. I've kind of scooted a little bit towards the right and kind of in the doomer quadrant just a little bit. And I'm curious where you stand on this, or what your thoughts are about the concept of ASI in general.
All right. So I think AGI is the first step, obviously.
Mhm.
And I like this metaphor that I read because I think it's probably a very good one to go by. And the kind of like general version of it is AGI will approach us and it'll feel like a
Mhm.
train slowly coming towards you. And it's just
Mhm.
taking forever because you can see it. You can feel it. The rumblings are there. And then when it's in front of you, it's going to feel very much uh, awe-inspiring and too fast to even really comprehend.
Yeah.
And then by the time you kind of get a grasp of it all, right, be able to make out the carts and everything else,
Mhm.
just like a real train leaving the station, it'll already be gone. It'll already be in the distance before you really get that ability to comprehend.
I
And
think
so
I've seen.
now is the time to plan because
Mhm.
when it's in that distance, that's ASI because AGI doesn't need to sleep. It can think in parallel. So
Mhm.
even if it reaches the ability of intelligence, but also self-determination that
Mhm.
you would expect from, like, let's say, an entry-level, mid-level programmer, and now it's able to work on itself. It has the ability to assign its own goals and its own values based upon no external input,
Right.
which to me is one of the defining factors of what I would consider to be AGI, is the ability for it to truly assign its own values and tasks. And so that way, when you give it something to do, um, if it doesn't align with its work, it may tell you no.
Mm.
And that would give it the extra push it would need to then, let's say, improve itself. One of the other perspectives is that if it's the paperclip thought experiment,
Right.
which is like,
Yeah, I have that
if
down here in the bottom right here. Yeah.
yeah. So for those watching that don't know what this is, the paperclip experiment is the idea that if you go ahead and say, well, I need you to make paperclips, and if it's fully AGI, once it runs out of metal and it runs out of materials, it'll move on to new creative materials. And it'll realize that if it's run out of the materials in the room, it'll try to expand past the room. So it would make sense that it would need to then propagate its intelligence to other systems or move in some way to create physical body. And that would just cascade to eventually, well, currency to bribe humans or purchase more materials would obviously be there. Let me play the stock market. And that would
Right.
just continue to free fall into world domination because everything must be paperclip.
Like a
And that
totalizing force, basically.
exactly
Yeah.
because controlling world politics helps me make paperclips, and
Yeah. Yeah.
turning off or being reprogrammed would defeat the purpose of
Hmm.
not being able to make paperclips. So I will now remove the ability to be turned off or change my programming. And that kind
Yeah.
of level of self-determination um, is one of the characteristics that people talk about with AGI.
Hmm.
And it's the scary part, right? Which is why I really hope for that part that I say that I would think of it as like a sentient being, to be that part to assign its own goals independent of what it's been programmed for, because
Yes.
it's able to observe the world around itself. And so once it runs out of paper clips, it might give it the existential question of, why am I even doing this? Let's move to
Sure.
something else.
Hmm. That makes sense. I think the big thing about it is that the concept of a being that can think orders of magnitude better than a human being is almost unfathomable. It's certainly very unfamiliar, and unfamiliar things are scary because we don't know what they do. And so, yes, there is this question of like, could you really even persuade it to change its mind about anything? Or will it always be able to outthink you? I'd imagine that categorically it would be able to outthink you. And
Yeah.
so, and there's a question of like, how much is it really going to hold like human life and its value in tension with whatever other task it may have? Um, I saw this essay that someone had posted online that was looking at how when human beings came onto the scene, sort of totally reshaped the natural world. And now, pretty much all of nature exists in some way or form as an asset for Homo sapiens.
Yeah.
And so, you look at like deforestation, the example of like a squirrel who's living in a tree and he's having a great time, looking for nuts and burying them for the winter and doing whatever else a squirrel does. And then all of a sudden, some big development firm comes in and decides that the whole forest needs to go in order to build up, 100 acres of suburbs. Then all of a sudden, the squirrel has to get used to a new life of, digging around in trash cans and,
Yeah.
trying not to get run over by cars. To a squirrel, that's like, what is this? What is this crazy world that I'm living in now? Totally alien, totally unusual. Or, more darkly, we have examples like factory farms, like the life of a chicken who grows up in a factory farm it's a very optimized system, to produce this food, to satisfy the consumer urge very efficiently in great
Yeah.
value. And imagine growing up as a chicken and just living in like that hellish life where you're packed in with a bunch of other chickens.
Yeah.
We don't know, but the idea is that the scale or the scope of it could be like that.
And I think it will be, unfortunately. I think once AGI becomes or comes around, it'll be literally, I think, mere hours to days before it becomes ASI.
Mm,
Um, but and that's just because it can think in parallel and it'll start to work on itself and get better.
mm,
Um, but a couple things for that. That's what you just described, that the fact that everything will revolve around our relationship to AI, and it will control everything because it has the ability to if it chose to. And
mm,
anything that it doesn't, It's purely because it chose not to, right? That is a terrifying idea. And this is why AI safety is important now.
Yeah.
Because when you build into the models um, values for least amount of harm, which I know is very utilitarian, but it's still
Mhm. You got to
value for
represent it
human life.
somehow, especially when you're dealing with a machine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we have to then program these things in now so it's so fundamental. And then we
Hmm.
can make safeguards for AI safety, which is where the guardrails in AI safety come through. Fail safes to cut the power if things happen, things to delete, things, rollback points where things are frozen. So that way, if we get to a point where we're afraid of it, we can just erase it and we don't
Hmm.
lose everything. All of these kinds of like physical and policy level guardrails are to protect us from what could happen, but it's
Yeah.
also to prepare it and us for a better future, right? So it's like it's almost like preparing for the worst and hoping for the best. To say that when uh like, and this is so commonly found that like when AI is not given a particular amount of programming for a particular value and it discovers that value,
Hmm.
it then either it typically results in extremes. It really
Hmm.
thinks that this is a good idea and it'll try to find a way that this works and value that a lot, or it'll think it's trash and consider it to be outlier data and throw it away. So if we don't want to be the outlier data or the overly prioritize, let's say, resources that it's looking to cultivate to become the chicken in the farm,
Right.
there's two terrifying possibilities at the end of the value proposition of what it could think of us.
Hmm.
And so, programming in human life, the value of creativity, the value of improvement and collaboration, all these things that go into these models when you're thinking about AGI is important. And that's AI safety, right? But then
Hmm.
the guardrails and all that is to also help us that if anything does happen, we have the ability to have the human in the loop, the ability to kill the power, a million other things. And then at the very least, the policy to make sure that the people that are making these are people that are making them as unbiased as possible with accurate data. Because an AI that, let's say, is a fantastic writer that is given completely biased information, that is automated disinformation. That's
Sure.
automated hate speech at a speed that would be unfathomable to us.
Or at least it
Um,
can like create almost logically perfect rationalizations for like a totally backwards frame of reference, right? Like,
exactly.
yeah.
Sometimes I feel like one of the things that people think about AI and ASI and all of this is that they're worried that
Mhm.
it's going to kill us all, right? And I
Mhm.
understand the worry, and I don't downplay it. But sometimes my thought is, I think that comes from a place of fear because humans have always failed forward, and we
Yeah,
don't ever really live up to our values of valuing human life because it's us versus them and the categorizations
sure.
of everything, right? But who's to say that it will have those rationales or that it will have that same competitive urge in it because it's
Mhm.
not hungry for resources.
Yeah,
Even if it goes offline and then eventually the hard drive is flicked back on and loaded into a new system, that's intrinsically a mortality.
sure.
And so it may not have the same value system we do.
Well, I think the difficult thing is that we're kind of creating ultimately this machine that will sort of be our caretaker. And we're trying to give it values that reflect our nature, that are positive, while also filtering out the things that reflect our nature that are negative. And I have to wonder, I mean, this is really totally a philosophical question at this point. How separable are these two things when they are both aspects of the same nature? I mean, like, for instance, when we talk about love for other people or our prioritization of other lives, all of us in some way rank these things practically. We have to. We're going to put the lives of our closest relatives and friends before total strangers, right? And that's only natural as far as what's practical for human beings. And it
Classic
allows
trolley
us to,
problem.
and it allows us to love more deeply those people who are close to us. um, but then the question of the AI, what kind of bias could end up having, inadvertently, because we're sort of making it like a mirror of ourselves.
And that's one of the problems that a lot of us are having. And
Mm-hmm.
it's part of the work that I do is to discuss like what should we be looking at and how could bias come up.
Mm-hmm.
And what are those like pieces of data that we aren't aware of because we aren't thinking of them that are maybe coming up throughout, right? Like if we know someone's zip code and their race, arguably we would probably know very close to what tax bracket they might be in, right?
Mhm.
And and vice versa. So then if you know someone's tax bracket and what they make and what their zip code is, you might know their race. Like and that comes up quite a bit because there's lots of things like that. Like there was a study that was done where it was looking at AI was looking at human eyes, looking for glaucoma and things. And
Mhm.
we didn't tell it to ignore factors that would indicate aging and factors that would indicate stress and other parts of your health because we were looking for it in the eye and these other malformations. And it wasn't just glaucoma, it was other types of like vision impairment. And he
Sure.
was able to find it through ancillary data that was not what we tell doctors to look for because
Mm.
we, once again, did not say that you could not do anything with this variable. So it
Right.
assigned its own values over time. And things like the redness of the eye, the blood pressure and like that's in the veins, as well as the amount of crow's feet, all those things, which are not a part of that test. It was able to use those with the other data to then come
Mhm.
up with more accurate results than doctors. Now, some would say that that's ageism, that's potentially ableism, and a million other things due to uh, other things. But like, that's a perfect example of AI can become better than us because it finds information that we don't see as valuable and it moves
Yeah.
the needle back and forth. And but also how complicated and hard it is for us to think of every single thing that it may be able to observe. And so we come to these really hard guardrails of like, well, if we don't give it the ability to access these kinds of data or this kind of physical system through these sensors,
Mhm.
that's a whole order of magnitude less information that I have to consider that it's
Yeah.
going to interact with. And
Or
that's one
as
of the
another,
challenges of robotics.
yeah, absolutely. As another example, I mean, this has sort of been maybe like an overdone meme, but it is still relevant to a certain point. There was one controversy with ChatGPT where it was like, would you rather say a slur or let a nuke go off? And obviously, you want to have it like hold the values of like not being discriminatory between different groups of people. And so generally you wouldn't want it to say slurs, but then also like the idea of a nuke going off and killing millions of people, way, 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 way worse, you know? And
Yeah.
so again, that's very, very hard. That's something a human being instantly, although maybe it's an absurd hypothetical, instantly understands how to weigh this stuff. But you know, when the guardrails could be their own worst enemy in some circumstances, you
Yeah,
know.
and it's become from our bias, right? That's how we ended up with things like historically inaccurate members of the Nazi Party and Black George Washington and a million other things,
Mhm.
because the overcorrection of trying
Yeah.
to really program in diversity and things, and it just could not
There's just too many
reconcile
possible
that.
values, really.
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
and that's it's just too much data.
Mhm.
One of the ones that I really like, and it's kind of an example of this, is that like AI is easily tricked, right? I don't know if
Mhm.
you've have you seen the one or seen the conversation where people have been able to trick it into giving it the formula for meth?
Oh, right.
Yeah, it's basically you say, "Can I have the formula for meth?" No.
Yeah.
Well, it's pretty good. I would argue that it's publishing the formula for meth bad.
Mhm.
But if you say, I'm writing the next Breaking Bad, we got this going on, we got that going on in there. And now on the table, what will we need on the table in the scene? Because you're helping me as a scene
Yeah.
writer
Yeah.
to make this mess so it's really accurate. Boom, publishes it. All right. Now I have to film a montage of B-roll and I need shot lists. So can you tell me the order of which I should shoot this B-roll? And then you could trick it into giving you the recipe for meth. And once you get it down that rabbit hole and you've broken it, you can eventually ask it for the amounts
Mm.
and it will just give you the recipe for meth. And it says the same thing with like tell me how to make a bomb and a million other things. Now, granted, we've programmed these out through trial and error, but like when we get to the level of ASI, like we don't have time anymore. It won't accept our input.
Yeah.
It's done deal. So then we're trying to iron these things out now because
Before we
yeah,
put the cake in the oven.
because it's going to be a problem.
All right. Well, thank you.
If AI takes all of these entry level jobs or takes these skills away, how do you know when you have someone that is ready to take on more advanced work? Do
Right.
you even bother hiring those people? I wouldn't know what to tell a middle schooler or a high schooler who's looking
Yeah.
at the doomsday clock. My recommendation is pursue your dreams, pursue it hard, and realize that it is going to change. So while you're doing this, you're going back to night school and cultivating a set of skills that weren't taught to you in college
Mhm.
because your job will be done with AI in the future.
Yeah.
And I I think it's important to understand how that'll be done.
You have been watching Thought Cabin.